Soldier, if you can get that part for me by closing time, I'll let you date my baby sister.
Have you ever taken the engine out of a car or roamed around in a liminal fever dream of a city within a racing game? I definitely didn't, until I went down the rabbit hole of finding some of the strangest games in the street racing genre.
Like and subscribe for more trash.
The early 2000s birthed potentially the most interesting era of car culture and video games to exist. Games like Need for Speed Underground and the Midnight Club series made street racing one of the most popular game genres of its time. But for every popular racing game that was played by millions of people, there's a lesser known game that's been hiding in the shadows. I probably could have lived the rest of my life never knowing that any of these games existed, but some of you guys made it really clear that I needed to check these games out, so that's what we're doing. Do you like the aesthetic of Final Fantasy, the street racing elements of Tokyo Extreme Racer, and the RPG elements of Gran Turismo? Well, in June of '99, Square had you covered with their take on the genre, Racing Lagoon. I spoiled the premise within the first sentence, but this is quite literally the Final Fantasy of street racing games. Taking a break from the typical fantasy setting, Street Racing Lagoons brings us to the streets of Yokohama. But we aren't leaving that Square art style at the door just because we're heading to Japan. The UI, cutscenes, and character models are very stylistic, while the location and very well done car models keep us grounded closer to reality. The premise of Racing Lagoon is similar to that of Initial D. You find yourself in the midst of a territory war going on to uncover the new racing legend of the night. You and your buddy Kenzo are gearing up for your first race right before you get left in the dust by the new up-and-coming potential legend. It's made clear in the very beginning that this is going to be a racing game with a story premise unlike any other racing game I've played. Dialogue is laid on pretty heavy in the beginning between pre-rendered cutscenes, dialogue choices, and even the replay of your first race where you reflect on what just went down, which is a really creative use of the replay system. You're part of the BLR crew taking on the night racers. Yes, it's very anime, but your amateur skill in the beginning is very apparent and something you'll need to work on if you want to move yourself up the ranks. After your first race, you're free to explore the hub world of South Yokohama, visiting key locations that racers hang out at, most notably the gas station where you save your progress, the Denny's, and the tuning shop where you can buy and sell parts that you've earned from other racers. This is one of the unique gameplay features of Racing Lagoon. You can challenge racers in the open map by flashing your lights or, more likely, running into racers flashing theirs, which will set up a point-to-point race where the winner gets to take a part from the loser's car. It's a really neat system that takes inspiration from Gran Turismo's upgrade system and adds a real risk-reward element to it. So with an interesting racing system and a unique cast of characters with a striking art direction to go along with it, you may be wondering why this game hasn't gotten your attention over the years, or why you may not have even heard of it at all. It's of course me just making assumptions about you through the video. The main reason is that Racing Lagoon was only released in Japan. There was almost no chance you would see this game on a shelf here in the States back in the day, and even if you did, you wouldn't understand anything that was going on unless you could read Japanese. However, in 2021, thanks to a small team that goes by Hilltop, we would get a fan translation allowing us English speakers to finally experience what this game is all about. Apparently this translation project was pulled together in just 6 months, which honestly seems remarkable for such a niche game that was long past its glory days. But people were getting real bored post-COVID, so I guess there's that. Nonetheless, we now have a fully preserved and translated way to experience this unique game, and I think that's fantastic. The team even provides an easy mode save file with a much more powerful car to start, which you might want to consider if you actually play this for yourself. This has to be the first racing game where I've lost every single race that I've played. I'm not joking. No matter what, the opponents always seem to be faster than me, which is a problem amplified when I'm losing performance parts with every race. Please stop taking my parts. The driving itself can also feel a little jank with really aggressive collision and sloppy steering. This could partially be me just not spending enough time with it, but I could not for the life of me get used to the handling model. The e-brake either felt like nothing or it was sending me straight into a wall. But vehicle handling aside, there is so much to love about Racing Lagoon. The world building is fantastic, the characters are interesting, and even things as minute as a test track are given lore and a backstory about the design of the track and the person behind it. The soundtrack is truly phenomenal, featuring top-of-the-line composers from their era, giving this nice jazzy vibe to it, reminding me a lot of Gran Turismo. And everything about the art direction, from the car models to the locations you visit, are crafted with care and attention to detail. Character animations are weird as hell though. If you can get past some of the dated driving physics and load times, Racing Lagoon is a great way to experience some of that immersive Square storytelling from a different angle.
He's got two things in his crib that I don't. A waterbed and a girlfriend.
But if you're looking for something a little more modern, there's plenty more to rush into. Coming highly recommended from the comments section of my Y2K Street Racing Games video, LA Rush is a game that I have somehow never heard of until now. Developed by Midway and released in October 2005, LA Rush was competing with the recently released Midnight Club 3, as well as all of the other street racing games at the time. The story starts off with a lavish house party, showing your character tricks in the garage, talking about your rise to the top from your S14.
When are you gonna let us rework the cart, T?
Yeah, man. This thing makes my eyes hurt every time I come in this place.
By the way, I don't know what's going on with the subtitles. They followed the text, but it's off, and that's just how it was in the video. This is when you're introduced to the villain of the story, Lydell, who wants to buy his way to the top of the street racing scene.
Somebody should have told me this party was being held at a Snappy Lou.
LA Rush predicts the 2008 housing crisis by having Lydell bankrupt you after your 2-week vacation, leaving you to do the whole work your way up from the bottom story to take back the city. Who could have seen that coming?
One winner advances, the loser go home.
That's right, one winner. We already know who that is, so y'all might as well pack it in now.
The goofy early 2000s vibe with the wavy graphics and cheesy voice acting kind of feels like what Juiced would have been if it had a storyline and an open world. Yeah, similar to the Midnight Club games, LA Rush has a surprisingly big open world to explore, littered with pedestrians, destructible objects, and a lot of traffic. They even managed to cram this map into the PSP version of the game, which from what I can tell was a port done by the same team. There's also an obviously GTA-inspired wanted system when you encounter cops, but they felt more like set dressing than anything else because they never slowed down my progression or stopped me from entering races at all. The gameplay itself feels surprisingly similar to another street racing game set in LA. You're dropped into the world with your 240 and you're free to start exploring as soon as you finish your phone call. Where have I played this before? Racing is mainly done between circuits and checkpoints scattered around the map, very similar to Midnight Club. The handling model is also very similar to Midnight Club. It's arcadey, but also weighted to a point where you aren't slamming through traffic or streetlights without penalty. Crashing sends your car into an over-the-top explosion that you trigger, similar to what you do in the Burnout games. And all of these elements make me feel like I'm playing a Midnight Club LA demake, which makes you wonder if Rockstar was potentially taking any inspiration for their own game. Nah, it's just a coincidence. Racing format aside, this is where the Midnight Club comparisons kind of start to taper off. Unlike most of the other games of its time, unlocking cars isn't done by purchasing them, but rather earning them in races or finding your old cars in chase events where you have to escape from a convoy of Escalades and make it back to your house with as little damage as possible.
Nice work getting them wheels, T.
The funny thing is that these guys are significantly more aggressive than the cops. Your earned cash is instead used to pay for the damage you took during your escape with your car, as well as entry fees for races and for pimping your car out at West Coast Customs. Unfortunately, these upgrades are done in a linear purchase and you don't get any choice in the customization. Boo. There may have been a budget or even a product placement restriction to this, because there's some choice cars that you obtain through the introduction of the game. There's a number of licensed and Midway custom vehicles to earn in LA Rush, including some of the coolest trucks like the Nissan Frontier. I didn't realize that I was entering myself into an expensive endurance race against Vipers and Saline S7s. Good thing I brought my Nissan Titan. Just kidding, I couldn't keep up with them even when I was constantly using boost. Sure, the story is a little bit silly, the performance is hit or miss, and there's some shortcomings with the gameplay, but LA Rush is actually a lot more fun than I thought it would be. Its presentation doesn't take itself too seriously, the progression is pretty good, and it's always marking something for you to do on your minimap, and there's even a GPS system to find your way around. You hear that, Criterion? Even LA Rush lets you set waypoints. Watch my Burnout video for context. It's one of those products of its time games that you just kind of had to be there to get. The vibe was very different when we had that tuner car culture clashing with the West Coast Customs Pimp My Ride influence. Speaking of which,
I don't even know where to start with this one.
Released in November 2006, Exhibit the Game, otherwise known as Pimp My Ride, might be the first game with cars that I've played where driving virtually has nothing to do with the gameplay. Your goal is to take a clap box and turn it into a clap box, but with shiny paint and a fish tank in the trunk.
That's so cool. I have a sewing machine in my car.
Pimp My Ride takes place in Pimp City, and the first thing I noticed about Pimp City is that you can slam into traffic for money. The gameplay loop is pretty simple. You build up a threshold of money, get a client, and then use that money in a number of shops that you race to within a time limit to out-pimp your nameless rival.
There's always someone who thinks they can do it better than you.
These pimping missions are Oh God, why did I put that in there? These pimping missions are earned by the series of collectibles and missions you do throughout Pimp City, like using the dedicated cruise button to do a button prompt flyby.
You're not the only pimp in town wanting to make a name for himself.
Or by playing this ghost riding minigame where you hit button prompts when they come up. I'd say it's a rhythm game, but there's no rhythm to it. However, after you've earned enough money through pimping missions, it's time to pimp your client's ride.
Yeah! I knew it! Oh my god! I was gonna get pimped! What?
You do this by performing this crazy taxi series of minigames within a time limit that involves you hitting button prompts. Yeah, this game sucks, but at least the characters are entertaining.
What happened to your window?
Yeah, I got hit on the side so the door doesn't open. So that's how I get into my truck. You just have to be careful that the glass doesn't get you when you climb through.
Marcia, all I can say is I hope this thing runs well enough to drive to the hospital.
I always had a curiosity for what this game could be exactly, and as it turns out, it's not a racing game, despite being developed by Eutechnics, the people behind Street Racing Syndicate. Yeah, that's a strange change in development, but if you were still wanting some street racing in your Pimp My Ride game, you wouldn't have to wait very long, because in 2009, we got Pimp My Ride Street Racing. Here's what I was able to find out about it. And when it comes to playing it, well, there isn't much more substance to it than that. First off, there's no exhibit or ride pimping in sight, unless you count the pimp section where you customize your generic car with generic parts you unlock from racing. Oh yeah, I unlocked Rim Type 3. Pretty cool. You get a series of different tournaments that you can race through, like Hood Stars, Sugar Babies, and Nasty Gangsters. I don't even know what to say about that.
I don't even know where to start with this one.
Yeah, do you want to race in the hood, or do you want to race in the posh area? The most entertainment you'll get from this game is the different names they decided to give everything, like the Skrilla you earn from racing, because the fun in this game definitely doesn't come from the racing itself. This has to be the most we made this game just to keep the lights on game that I've ever played. You end up racing on these wide, long stretches of roads where the laps take about twice as long as they should to complete, and you'll spend that time bumping into traffic that barely matters and using boost pickups that you don't really need. There has been a lot of instances at this point where I've complained about rubber banding, but in this game, they have the opposite problem. Within 30 minutes, I found myself overlapping the opponents on multiple occasions. Within 30 minutes, I just started the game. The driving mechanics are fine, but with long stretches of roads and no variety, you can't really take advantage of it. These levels could have used tighter roads with a few more chicanes. This game is like playing one of those $3 asset flip AI games on the eShop, except this was a real licensed product. I hate to say it, but even Pimp My Ride has more character than this.
Marcia, you remember your old ride, right? Man, it was finished, but not anymore. Take a look at your brand new ride.
That's my car! That's my car!
That being said, this wasn't just a PS2 exclusive. Let's take a look at that DS version. Pimp My Ride gave racing a shot, but ultimately it didn't work out. But what about a game from a studio that's a little more familiar with racing games? Coming straight from May 2002 and from a long line of racing games, Test Drive Overdrive, the Brotherhood of Speed, that is a really long name, released to compete with the increasing popular street racing game genre at the time. Featuring racing across 4 different cities and an underground story in the bottom corner of the main menu, Overdrive is clearly separating itself from the previous entries. The story mode must take inspiration from secret agent movies at the time because your partner is a rich British guy that loans you all of his cars to go street racing for him.
But I guarantee after you've driven my stable of cars, you won't ever want to go back to hustling drag races in the Burger World car park.
The interesting thing about Overdrive stories is it seems that all of the drivers have their own names and personalities that you get to see within the cutscenes of the game.
These quasi-closed tracks are BS. The cops got me 3 times, man.
The new guy's not bad. Cute, too.
Guys, I think I just shit myself. These dialogue segments play in between races and it adds a lot of charm to the experience. When it comes to the gameplay, it's clear that the team has some prior racing game experience here, which would make sense because it was actually developed by Midway, the same team behind LA Rush. I really like the driving mechanics in Overdrive. They feel realistic enough to notice the details, but arcadey enough to be easy to pick up and play. The Shelby GT will burn through first gear while struggling to gain traction, and your brakes will get harder to use with the faster you drive. But as soon as you see traffic flying all over the place, you realize that this is an arcade game at heart. Overdrive features licensed cars, licensed music, and surprisingly good performance to match its visuals. It almost feels Project Gotham-esque at times, and it had me forgetting that I was playing a PS2 game. The buttery smooth frame rate and handling model make the gameplay itself feel great, but that only matters if the tracks are good, right? Well, unlike Pimp My Ride street racing, the tracks feel like they were made with love and have a lot of variety to them. You drive through San Francisco, Tokyo, London, and Monte Carlo, with all of these locations bringing a different landscape with them. You have long stretches of highway that encourage cutting through oncoming traffic to get the best driving line, tight curving mountain roads, picturesque back streets, and plenty of verticality to match the location. Similar to Pimp My Street Racing, laps are completed in just a few minutes, but unlike Pimp My Street Racing, Overdrive earns every second of that time with intense head-to-head racing against your opponents. Rubber banding is a little bit noticeable here, especially when you're able to easily catch up after bailing out, but not as easily able to hold that lead. That being said, maybe it's necessary with how much you'll actually bail out, if you drive like me. I thought traffic in Underground was bad, but my god, they have nothing on Overdrive here. I don't know if I've ever played a racing game where I've run into so much traffic. Even the AI isn't immune to this. It feels like every time our group passes a car, at least one of us is going to slam into that family of 4, sending them flying into an opponent. In the beginning, I was thinking, wow, this traffic is actually a little hard to avoid. That's an interesting touch, but the more you play it, the more ridiculous it gets. I get that it's a street racing game, but damn.
I guess they don't call it the land of the rising sun for nothing.
The only other element that I wasn't really the biggest fan of is the drag racing mode. It's a good idea in theory, but it quickly makes you realize why the Need for Speed games dresses theirs up. Once you know where the shift points are, every race plays the same way, going as fast as possible and waiting for the timer to run out. But maybe that's just the drag racing experience, huh? Overall, I like the package that Overdrive delivers. There isn't a bunch of fancy customization or a big open world, just simple fun racing and an interesting single-player experience. A very polished one at that. I like the laid-back vibe of racing with a group that feels more like a hangout than a racing fight to the end of the other's career.
I just don't want to harsh the vibe around here. That's all.
Unless you count taking their pink slip from them.
I was robbed! This is bull! You totally cheated! Stop, how do you say it? Harshing the vibe, dude.
You can still progress if you come in 2nd or 3rd place, which is a nice break from the strict focus of winning from other games in the genre. You also get to play Pong on the loading screen, which I think was a uniquely Test Drive thing. Shout out to Atari. Now, maybe Overdrive was more of an obscure experience for its series, but Test Drive and Pimp My Ride aren't necessarily the most obscure names in the genre. We're gonna have to search a little bit deeper. Which brings us to RPM tuning.
Whoa, pretty sweet ride, dude. Comes from Berg's place, right?
Right. How did you know that?
Forget it.
Published by Wanadu and developed by French studio Babylon Software, which would explain the weird translations.
Come on, you don't remember me? Elementary, baby, because we ain't been officially introduced yet. My name's Mac.
RPM tuning hit the PC, PS2, and Xbox around May 2004. This is a weird one.
We're fighting for the same thing, bro. Dollar signs, baby. Flow, skrilla bling. And that's cool.
There was some special testing that Mac here didn't get done back in his day. Our story starts with a guy named Vince who was apparently on a mission to find a stolen car. I think. The grammar in this intro text is worse than mine. You walk into a shop to find Burke Lewis, the greatest tuner of all time, who wants absolutely nothing to do with you.
I'm busy. If it's for an oil change, find yourself another garage.
Until he finds out you're in the market for a new Honda Civic.
Well, maybe I can spare a minute. I always have time to find a car for someone who's interested in tuning. I've got 3 models you might like. Let's take a look at them together.
Your starting car choices are a hatchback SI, a pickup 150, and a sport 322 CSI. I think I have one of those outside actually. Yeah, there might not be any licensed cars in RPM tuning, but the models look so damn close to the real thing that it almost seems like they were planning on getting licenses in the beginning. So RPM tuning is a renderware engine game, but this isn't like a Criterion or Rockstar type of renderware engine game. This is more like a roadkill type of renderware engine game.
Just trust old Mac, dog, and your pockets will be stuffed like a Christmas turkey. Oh yeah, race me to the track.
For starters, RPM tuning runs at 30 FPS, half of our last game, which is strange when you consider that the Burnout titles hit 60 FPS no problem, all while being much more visually impressive than this. Granted, they had a talented team that made the software over there, but regardless.
Tough break, man.
RPM tuning doesn't have much going for it in the looks department. The world geometry, textures, and track layouts are very simplistic and full of static objects that won't budge if you hit them. This can get a little bit frustrating when you accidentally run over a curb or get stuck on a road sign or a fire hydrant.
I was telling my friends here that you're a real demon behind the wheel.
You'll be doing this a lot because the driving feels very stiff and the slightest nudge against the curbs on either side of the road will send you spinning out of control. This wasn't something that I noticed in the very beginning, but once I got to the first tournament, I realized how much I felt like I was walking on eggshells during the race.
Allow me to introduce you to your victims.
The rough driving was amplified by the fact that the AI felt nearly impossible to keep up with. But this is RPM tuning, right? Let's do some RPM tuning to fix some of these problems.
You best be in top form. Know what I'm saying?
So once we get to the tuning menu, we can see that our car apparently has a Honda motor now, but also that the translation of these part names and descriptions are a little bit weird. The fuel pump is an inject, the cold air intake is an SPI1, and the sway bar is a Power Vibe Classic. You might get in trouble for looking that up on the Maybe it's a French thing. I threw on a bunch of performance parts and not only did I notice the uptick in power, but I also noticed an interesting quirk that I haven't seen in another racing game. When using the nitrous, your car will start to overheat, and once it's in the red, it'll actually slow the car down when you try to use the NOS. It won't actually blow the engine though. You just wait for it to cool down, then you can use the nitrous again. It's not cheating, bud. It's just GT Grape NOS. There's also no turbo sounds, and I'm still struggling to keep up. Now my car is even more susceptible to spinning out, but no problem, right? We'll just throw some tires on there. So let's just add some Yokohama brand tires, and I'm not sure what's going on here, to be honest. Even though I have enough money for the parts, it won't let me buy the cheaper tires. It'll only let me buy the more expensive ones that I don't have enough money for. I've also accumulated a bunch of fame points for constantly spinning out of control, and I'm not really sure what these are used for.
Christmas turkey!
Another problem I have with the driving is that the physics are stiff and feel a little bit inconsistent. I feel like running into an AI opponent will completely throw me out of whack, but then they can run me off the road and quickly recover from it. And when it comes to the aesthetic upgrades, we see some interesting looking decals that we're able to put on, and after spending all of my money on performance parts, that's about as far as I got with it. Considering I still couldn't keep up with the AI and I didn't see much changing in regards to track variety or race types, I didn't really feel like this game was worth grinding out. That being said, seeing more of this oddly translated story is very tempting.
Cops, man, they got no manners. Interrupting us like that in the middle of our introductions.
Gameplay just wasn't doing it for me here. There's actually a free roam mode that lets you cruise around the entire city, which has an uncomfortable vibe to it that makes me feel like I'm traveling through a liminal space despite all the traffic on the road. The traffic will actually stop and put their hazards on if you hit them, which is a nice touch, I guess, and the damage model isn't too bad either. I'm trying to find the positives here. I find it a little strange that the two founders that are listed for Babylon Software are described as car physics and racing game specialists, but this is the product they came out with. It definitely feels like they were trying to create something special here, but for me, it wasn't that great to play. It's also worth reminding you guys that this game came out in 2004. If this was sitting on the shelf next to Underground 1, 2, and hell, even SRS, and this was the experience I got, I'd be a little upset.
Choice is yours.
Coming from a time where low-budget games were often printed for consoles, RPM tuning is a bit odd, but definitely not out of the ordinary. Where things really start getting obscure is when we move over to the PC. Lada might be the most obscure racing game that I've ever played. I really hope that it's Lada and not Lada, because I'm going to be saying Lada a lot. Released around March of 2006 and developed by Galeos Media, Lada Racing Club is a PC exclusive to Russia. Therefore, I have no idea what I'm doing without a translation app. This game has one of the coolest intros I've ever seen, showing off shots of this kid transitioning between building a race car to take on the street and racing with a wheel on his computer. And that brings us to the gameplay, which Lada Racing Club takes in a direction that no other game has. The name being a dead giveaway, Lada Racing Club features, well, Ladas from the manufacturer Autovaz. From what I can tell, this Soviet-era backed manufacturer's cars are the only option you have to drive, despite passing traffic very inspired by other manufacturers while racing. You have a variety of modes to race in, but the most interesting part about Lada Racing Club is easily its location, taking place around Moscow. Creating a game where you can explore a familiar area that's typically overlooked in games was probably pretty special to the devs. And if you played a lot of games that are solely based in Russia, you probably think I'm really stupid saying that right now, but I haven't. Unless it was like one level in Project Gotham Racing or a 007 game, or Call of Duty. That being said, the experience in Lada Racing Club is a bit hit or miss. I'm not sure if this game supports gamepads, but mine doesn't work, so I opted to use the arrow keys on my keyboard. This game made me feel like I was a kid again playing NASCAR Heat on Windows XP. The driving physics are manageable, if not a little floaty. Hitting traffic didn't give much resistance, but running into static objects or the lowest curb against the road could stop me dead in my tracks. And getting back up to speed would happen at a snail's pace. But maybe that's accurate to how fast these cars actually drive. One frustratingly static object is the rails that you get between the sidewalk and the road, because I would constantly find myself not being able to cross back over until I found an opening. The car and damage models have a decent amount of detail to them, and there's even cops that'll try to stop your racing. Man, I'd hate to be the guy that got stopped by the sexy Russian police officer. By the way, the soundtrack in this game slaps, even if I have no idea what they're saying. There's tuning and other gameplay elements that I don't really understand how to interact with because I don't speak Russian. But maybe there's a Slavic YouTuber out there that can give a little more insight here. It seems like there's a fan-made English patch that I can install, but I think I've spent enough time in Lada for now. Why don't we take our 100th look at a street racing game in LA? Coming to us from our Hungarian friends at Invictus Games and our Canadian friends at Groove Games, we have a collaborative effort to bring us LA street racing. A little strange with the countries considered, but could be pretty cool, right? This is, of course, a 2006 PC exclusive that you may or may not have received in a bargain bin. After picking from a diverse selection of drivers, you're treated to a slideshow that presents you the immersive and gripping story of LA street racing. This game is truly the Tony Hawk's Project 8 of street racing games, having you move your way up a massive list of racers to get your shot at taking on Matt Peacock. I wonder if he's related to Drew. The gameplay loop is pretty simple. Select an area to hang out in, wait for a racer to challenge you, and then wager your parts against theirs to progress yourself into a faster car. As a nice surprise, I was able to map a controller with analog support for triggers and thumbsticks. Unfortunately, I had to Google how to change the camera view, because like most early 2000s PC games, they don't tell you that you gotta use the function keys to change it. Visually, LA Street Racing doesn't look the worst that I've seen for its time. It actually let me run the game in a modern resolution, which is a plus. The damage model is actually more impressive than you might think, crushing panels together depending on on where they get hit, as well as flopping the doors around, which I found very entertaining within the cockpit view. Another entertaining element is the steering animations, which are hilariously sensitive. And the handling model itself is better than I expected it to be honest, and there's a good reason for that, which we'll get to later. But understeering, pressure-sensitive braking, and suspension dampening all play a role in the driving experience, which is generally tight and responsive, outside of the wheels feeling like they're on ice in some instances. Something that surprised me is that your opponents can get very aggressive. They'll lay on the horn and attempt to push you out of their way if you block them, which also is an element that reminded me of Juiced. Damn, maybe that game really was ahead of its time, huh? That being said, the driving experience starts to get a little bit weird when you start changing the camera angles. The cockpit view is probably my favorite, keeping me feeling planted to the road and giving me the ability to accurately judge my cornering, but I'm not sure how usable the backseat camera or the action camera is when you're actually trying to race. The chase camera is okay. It doesn't follow the car when you look side to side, which is a little bit weird. But a bigger camera issue is that when you turn with the chase camera, the car looks like it throws itself into a sharp angle that you definitely don't see the same way in the cockpit view. Maybe the steering is trying to compensate for the camera change, but I don't think it's great. The camera also shakes worse than Kane and Lynch 2 whenever you hit the nitrous, which is honestly an incredible achievement. I never thought I'd see worse camera shake in a game than that. This might sound harsh, but I don't really understand why this game came out in this state. Lada Racing Club also came out in 2006, but at least it had the benefit of a good soundtrack in a location that no other game has. You could tell that there was some passion behind that one. LA Racing Club is just another LA street racing game, which by this point we've had a ton of better examples of. Location aside, everything else about the game is just plain boring. You initiate races by sitting around and waiting. Your story is delivered through broken English one-liners. Customization is barely existent. Performance upgrades are barely noticeable, and progression is unbelievably slow. You'll spend half an hour racing the same 2 or 3 tracks over and over to earn the chance at getting a new part. A part you may or may not get depending on how fast the person challenging you is. And then if they get your part, that just sets you back. Alright. In my opinion, it feels like a weird game to be throwing any bit of a budget at. It just kind of exists, which is even stranger when we take a look at our next game. Saved the best for last because I went into this game not expecting much and I walked away from it very surprised. And it's actually coming from our friends over at Invictus Games again. Originally this was going to be a segment on the game Street Legal Racing Redline, but there were a few quirks to consider with that. For starters, it doesn't have controller support, so we'd have to give that back up for the classic keyboard controls. But unlike the other games we looked at, Redline isn't a standalone game. It's actually part of the Street Legal series of games, the original one having a modern re-release. So the first game is technically an older game with a newer release with features not supported by the newer title, which is technically an older release. My head hurts. I figured it was only right to take a look at the beginning of this series, so let's jump into Street Legal Revision and see what it's all about. Originally released in 2001 from Invictus Games, Street Legal is also a PC exclusive racing game that puts a focus on modifications in your car's damage model to a surprising degree. Unlike LA Street Racing and a lot of the other games we looked at, Street Legal actually has a cult following behind it and a mostly positive rating on Steam. So after the lackluster experience with LA Street Racing, you're probably wondering the same thing as me. With the positive reviews on Steam, what the hell is going on in this game that makes it so special? Well, instead of breaking down every element of the game, I'm just going to tell you how my experience played out within the first hour. I started a single player game which offers an array of game modifiers if you're familiar with the vanilla experience. I picked out my car from the buy here pay here parking lot, I thought about having a Coke drink, and then I headed back to my garage. Now I was ready to hit the streets, but not before backing up and flooring it into my garage door. Oh wow, I already ruined my front bumper. I drove around a little bit to get used to the controls, and then I bent my control arm on a curb. That's when I realized I needed to honk my horn at an NPC to set up a race, which after doing so I decided to do even more damage to my front end, leaving it undrivable. After realizing I couldn't sell my car to make enough money to get a new one, I decided to start a fresh game. Now that I'm experienced with the game's controls, I found an opponent for my first race. While racing, I noticed him wreck his car not once, but at least twice, He still beat me. Then a cop chased me into a curb where he flipped my car into someone's lawn, gave me a $200 fine, and then left me there to tow my car back to the garage. As you can see, street legal is quite the experience. But if we take a look at our car here back at the garage, this is where things get even more interesting. You can take almost every part off of the car, sell it, and then browse the catalog full of parts to replace them. It's interesting to see real brands like Borla and Bilstein here. Then again, RPM Tuning also had some, so I guess licenses were a little more obtainable back then. But the only comparable game to this that I can immediately think of is BeamNG, which didn't come out until 2015. It feels remarkable that we have a game that not only has a damage model that lets you smash up every panel on the car in great detail, but also lets you pull multiple engine components off, sell them, buy upgrades, and then take the car out to smash it up again. And the craziest part of all is that all of this is happening in a game from 2001 that I'd never even heard of until this guy left a comment on my Street Racing Games video. Why is it that with all of the technology we have now, we haven't iterated on this experience? Sure, we have Wreckfest, but Wreckfest doesn't let you tow your smashed up car back to the garage to fix it yourself. Sure, Gran Turismo lets you do engine swaps, but you aren't manually pulling the engine out yourself and changing the head on it. Need for Speed has plenty of open world games, but you aren't scared of slamming through traffic knowing that you'll have to limp it back to your garage and buy new parts for it. For the first time in a racing game in a long time, Street Legal had me genuinely curious about what else I could do in it, which is shocking when you consider that the game they released 5 years later had me falling asleep while playing because of how painfully simple it was. Of course, that's not to say that it's perfect, because Street Legal is far from it. The reason I was doing so much Google searching was because the game doesn't explain itself very well. You'll honk at NPCs on the street for directions or to find racers, as well as just to have basic conversations about your car or general happenings around the city. Sure, the English is still imperfect, but it's a neat RPG style concept that a lot of racing games opt out of. But outside of this random guy yelling instructions for an effective engine build at me, I had to figure this stuff out on my own. When it comes to the gameplay, there's no getting around the fact that this is a budget game from 2001. There's a fair amount of jank, the steering feels really off, and the visuals leave a lot to be desired. But despite its flaws, the amount of detail that you do get within the customization on this game from 2001 is still impressive, and the gameplay, while definitely jank, has this charm about it that explains why so many people are still playing it. All of this experience has been had on the free Steam demo, by the way. There's still a whole ass game as well as the DLC and the Redline sequel to check out. Outside of all of the games that I've played throughout this video, Street Legal might just be my favorite. Maybe it's worth doing a deeper dive on the Invictus games and seeing everything they have to offer, but you guys can let me know if that's something you want to see. They're actually still operating today, believe it or not, which is something I can't say about a lot of developers from this era. Except for David Goodrich. Shout out to Sandra for this comment that put me on game for all of these weird street racing games, as well as all of the other comments that pointed me out to LA Rush and all the other games I didn't even think of. If it wasn't for these comments, this video probably wouldn't exist. So if you have any ideas yourself, let me know what you think. If you want my opinion on video games that aren't so obscure, you can check out my video on the Burnout series as well as the Y2K street racing games that I played. I also got to give a special mention to Scotty, Joking Bomb, Exit, and Not a Clown 2 for their continued support on the channel. If you want your name immortalized in the credits, become a channel member. Otherwise, if you guys got any opinions for more horrible games I should check out, drop them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Be sure to like and subscribe. It's been Josh, aka T, baby. See you in the next one. This is an HP stream that I actually bought to download diagnostic software for my car on. Turns out, there's no storage on this thing to even update it. Don't buy an HP stream.